Don't just live for tomorrow, or just live in yesterday. Just be glad for all you have that's in today. And though you've come through many obstacles.
Hey everyone, Connie here, and welcome to my blind reaction to Castlevania Season 4, Episodes 9 and 10. The final two episodes of the final season of Castlevania, not counting the sequel series we're eventually going to get. So, yeah, we've closed out everything with Carmilla and Isaac and Hector and all of that. And it seems like we might get like a little touch on like what those characters are doing now at the end, but we're mostly focused on the other storyline. So Targovishte is lost. Varney and them, they just completely just destroyed everything, killed everyone. Targovishte is lost. There's some survivors, but who knows how long they'll survive. Because, as I mentioned last time, there's still night creatures up top, and it's just a matter of time before they get to these surviving people, or the people go up there stupidly thinking it's going to be safer up there. And that includes Zamfir, who sacrificed herself in order to protect some others, which is like a very noble way to go. I won't argue that, and she was an interesting character. Definitely prettier than she was morally sound, I guess you could say, for the most part. It's weird because she was crazy. She was driven to insanity by everything that had happened. And it's hard to really get a good grasp on her character. She just felt like she was this weird outlier who had morality, who had moral fiber to her, but not like to the level of like Trevor and Sypha, and definitely had a lot more issues that made her really hard to root for sometimes. But she went out in a very noble way. I will give her that. But after taking everybody else out, Varney escapes through the mirror behind the king and queen, and he is able to go to Dracula's castle to oversee Saint Germain's resurrection of Dracula and his wife. Trevor and Sypha head out as well, leaving Targovishte basically the remaining people there to fend for themselves. At Alucard's castle, though, all the surviving people who got inside are still fighting the night creatures. Alucard and Greta are going down to help them. And they were unable to stop Saint Germain and his plans because he set up a barrier. But Trevor and Sypha are coming through now, so we're going to have reuniting of our big three and finishing off this half of the storyline. But there's only 2 episodes to go, so I'm just wondering, how are they going to finish this all off? Like, they've got to stop the return of Dracula. They've got to stop Varney and Saint Germain. They've got to stop all of these night creatures. And then there's still the looming threat of death, like the character Death, who has been built up prior in the season and still hasn't appeared. So I assume they have to here. Maybe it's going to have to do with something with Saint Germain trying to bring Dracula and his wife back from the dead. Maybe that's why Death is going to appear. I don't know. But it's like, it just feels like there's been so much this season, and so much that had been added on too. And we've only got two more episodes to close pretty much everything out. And it's actually closed out quite a lot. And even combined a couple of plot threads that I wasn't expecting them to do. But we still got to see how they handle the remaining two episodes before I can really give my full thoughts on the season. But like I said, this is the final Castlevania video until I guess the sequel series comes out. So hopefully it ends off really well. And we will talk in the afterthoughts about what will replace Castlevania on the schedule. But let's actually get to these two episodes. So when the screen fades to black, pause this redirect and go to the description below. Follow the link to the reaction, and after you watch it, come back here to the redirect and resume play. Because after it fades to black and then fades back in, everything from that point forward will be my afterthoughts and will contain spoilers to the episode. So, that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you at the reaction. And we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. So, we had one sad ending, I guess kind of two, but everyone else had a happy ending. Almost turned into a sad ending for Sypha, but this finale surprised me. And I think it's because of earlier in the season I had been talking about how are they going to wrap all of this up? How are they going to tackle everything that there still is to tackle? They did it. They wrapped everything up. And while there's still a couple things that are unanswered in the end, maybe we'll find that out with the sequel series. Maybe we'll learn more about that then. But either way, for the main focus of this season and all the storylines that we had, everything wrapped up. We wrapped everything up with Isaac and with Hector and Carmilla and them. We wrapped everything up with Sypha and Trevor and Alucard. We wrapped everything up with Varney and with Saint-Germain. And we even got some new stuff that we weren't expecting, like Dracula and Lisa having an ending. So, just overall thoughts on this finale and the season as a whole. The season, fantastic. A really great way to close everything out. The stakes were higher than ever. The enemies were stronger than ever. And the battles and animation were better than ever. And the finale itself delivered on every single note. It surprised me multiple times with Dracula and Lisa being back, with Varney being death, with Trevor sacrificing himself, or at least almost doing so, to defeat death. It surprised me many times. It made me tear up. And it made me smile. There was so much about this finale that just hit every mark. I don't consider this series to be my all-time favorite or one of my all-time favorites necessarily, but I cannot even slightly deny its quality. From the storytelling to the animation to the characters, it's just quality. It is very, very good. Very great, in fact. And so, rather than talk about all of the all of the action and stuff in here, I want to talk about the stuff that really made me love this finale and made me love this season and this series. I want to talk about the characters and how their stories in this series ended. Varney was an interesting character. We'll start with him. He was this strong accented English vampire who was kind of weird and crazy, kind of like this bum almost in a way, using others to achieve his goals. And there were hints throughout. There were hints. He said certain things that seemed weird. Like he was talking to the one Russian vampire guy. I can't think of his name right now. But he was talking to him like in the last set of episodes, and he said like, you don't even know what I am or what I can do or whatnot. And it's like it was very much a hint to his true nature. Looking back on it, it's very obvious. So when we find out he's Death, it surprised the shit out of me. Like, we had built up Death, and I assumed Death was going to be in this finale because of that. But I didn't think Varney was going to be Death. It combined two of the plot threads that I wanted to see completed, and completed them. And I think that was a genius move. And we find out that in this continuity, Death is not like a literal Grim Reaper, but he is an ancient creature who came into existence basically at the dawn of humanity. And ever since, he has been feeding off of death. He has been, every time someone dies, every time there's a war and there's a shit ton of deaths, he feeds off of the souls that are extinguished because of it. And so, with Dracula having started his campaign against humanity, Death saw this as a chance to basically have the biggest feast of his life. And so he disguised himself as a vampire named Varney and got himself into Dracula's armies so he could pull the strings. And I honestly almost think that he might have pulled the strings behind a lot more than that. I honestly would not be surprised if he had pulled the strings behind Lisa's death in the first place. That it was his plan, his goal, to cause Dracula to go crazy and vengeful against humanity like that. I would not be surprised. Now, it didn't say that he did that, but it's very possible. And it's just interesting because who knows how many other wars and shit during the history of the world he had his hand in. And we see that he's excessively powerful normally, but then he gets an upgrade in the final battle, and it's basically completely one-sided against Trevor. The only reason Trevor's able to defeat him is because of that special dagger and the pact that comes with it to create sort of this deal with God, as he put it, to be able to basically kill anything at the cost of one's own life. And the only reason Trevor survived was because of Saint-Germain. But we see that Death was significantly the most powerful enemy in this series. And it's really interesting because in the games, usually Death is a mini boss with Dracula as the final boss. But here it was kind of not even entirely the opposite, but it's like Dracula wasn't even the secondary boss here. Because Dracula had been defeated back in season 2. So they really kind of flipped the script on this and made Death actually a much more threatening enemy than ever. And honestly, I like that. I think that's a really fun idea, and I think they really made it work. So next I want to talk about Saint Germain. Saint Germain in season 3 was a really interesting character. He was funny. He was this scholar. He's a magician, an alchemist, and he wanted to find his long lost love by opening the infinite corridor. And by the end, we see he does succeed in getting into the infinite corridor, and we think it's like, okay, we're probably not going to see him again. But if we do, it's probably going to be his continued journey to finding his love. And then when we see him again in season 4, he's just back in the world. We find out that he traveled the infinite corridor and eventually found this alchemist who turned him towards a darker path in order to achieve his goals. Who we find out later on in this finale was actually Death as well, meaning that Death can traverse the infinite corridor at will, but also that Death was pulling the strings behind even more than we thought, and completely manipulated Saint Germain to a really unbelievable degree, because he was both the alchemist and Barney at the same time, and both of them were already manipulating Saint Germain's actions as it was, but we find out it's literally the same person for both of them. But Saint Germain goes kind of crazy. He's driven to insanity because of this alchemist's words and everything, and he believes he has to accomplish his goal no matter what, and that includes by doing things that he wouldn't normally do. He's driven to this idea of resurrecting Dracula into the body of a rebus, and not only Dracula, but his wife, Lisa, as well. And he chooses to utilize this to help him achieve his goal in finding his beloved. But in reality, it's not going to do that. And once he does realize that what he did was wrong, finally figuring out that he was a pawn for Death the entire time, he actually helps stop it. He helps Trevor and them stop the ritual to bring back Dracula and Lisa in the rebus. And in the end, even brings Trevor back. Well, actually, he doesn't bring Trevor back. He opens the infinite corridor, pulls Trevor in right before he can actually die, but not before he gets excessively injured. And then he manages to get him out of there and transport him quite a bit away, where it took him 2 weeks to get back. So yeah. But he did save Trevor. And presumably in his last breath, because it was very clear he was dying. It was very clear he was mortally wounded. But maybe he did help Dracula and Lisa somehow too at some point. Because as we saw, they also got an ending. Having woken up randomly in a field, naked for some reason, Dracula and Lisa were restored to the world. And they don't know how. They know nothing about it, but they're choosing to make the most of it. They're choosing to live as a happy couple. And doing so, he's no longer going by Dracula. He chooses to go by Vlad Tepes now. Choosing to live basically as a human with his wife. Showing just how much she changes him. And so they continue to just live, choosing not to return to the castle, choosing to let Alucard have it, and maybe one day they say they'll go back, but for now, they'll let him just have this peace. And that's where we get to our main heroes. And I'll start with Alucard. After the final battle, Alucard feels happy and at peace for the first time. The one pulling the strings is gone, and he can just start a new village with these people and live. And although it doesn't like flat out confirm a relationship, the fact that Greta does tell him she likes him really does, like, it feels good because I really did ship them. And I like to believe that they got together. Um, I really do see a lot of great chemistry between them, and I really, really think Alucard deserves happiness. And honestly, again, Greta just, they have such great chemistry. It just works. But after the final battle, Sypha, on the other hand, is not doing well. Because of Trevor's supposed sacrifice, she had been staying inside and not speaking to anyone for 2 weeks. She finally comes out, but only to leave, until Alucard and Greta manage to convince her to stay and help them out in building this new village, this Belmont village. She does agree, being convinced by them, and that's when Trevor comes back, having finally returned, still very gravely injured. He and Sypha get to reunite, and they reunite in only the way they can, of course. It's fully an interaction between these two, and it's perfect. Having finally just flat out spoken and said that they love each other, they're fully ready to go on to the next stage, as Sypha is pregnant. And I believe I heard that the sequel series is going to focus on their child as the next Belmont. And I believe it's Richter, but I'm not 100% sure about that, so don't quote me on that. If you want to correct me in the comments, please do so. But I believe that's what I heard about it. And if so, that means that they could still possibly appear in the series. So could Alucard, so could Greta, so could Vlad and Lisa. A lot of these characters could return. But we see that they are ready to live their lives together and raise their child together in this new village, in this new era of peace and hope. And yeah, things are looking up. But we did have one sad ending. Hector is having a conversation with his beloved, with Lenore, and she's upset. She does not like being caged like this by Isaac, who himself is having a happy ending. But Lenore doesn't like being stuck like this in a cage, and while Isaac won't kill her, it's very unlikely he'd let her free, for what I feel is obvious reasons. So, she chooses to commit suicide rather than live like that. And while Hector is at first not wanting her to do so, he accepts her wishes and sorrowfully lets her do it. And she does it by standing out in the sun and turning to dust. And it really sucks because they were a genuinely good couple, and I admittedly doubted their relationship at multiple points. But they proved to be a legitimately good couple, and I genuinely wanted to see them get a happy ending. And instead, Lenore chooses to go out kind of like Carmilla did, by her own terms, rather than live in accordance with someone else's wishes, someone else's restrictions. She chose to go out on her own terms. But unlike Carmilla, she died happy. She died getting to look at her beloved and smile. Carmilla was just full of spite and rage and vengeance, having said that she was going to enact revenge upon Isaac whenever he got to hell. But Lenore got to smile. She got to have joy. And she got to have love in the end. And so while it was definitely a sad ending, it was also kind of happy. And that's all we got for these stories. We don't fully find out what happened with Saint Germain, though we can assume he's dead. We don't find out what happened with Striga and Marana. All we know is that they went off to live together, just to be with each other. Kind of like how Vlad and Lisa ended up in the end. And Isaac, we know what happens with him. He's starting his own society. He's doing his own thing, just allowing himself and others to live, to truly live. But we didn't get to see him again. And it's like, that is, I think, the best part about this finale. More so than death, more so than Varney being death, more so than our heroes reuniting, the best part is the closure. All of these characters gain closure, whether for good or for sad. Every one of these characters got their ending and got an ending that was satisfactory for all of them. No one's ending felt wrong. No one's ending felt bad. It was a truly satisfying conclusion to this series. It was a truly wonderful conclusion to this series. And that's why I loved it so much. That's why I wasn't talking so much about the action or the fights with those, I guess they were all supposed to be vampires before the trio got to Death and Saint Germain. And so on and so forth. I wasn't talking about those because while those were cool and everything, that's basically all they were. They were cool. The action stuff, the fights, they were cool, but the heart of this series has always laid in its characters. How they've worked off of each other, how they've grown because of each other, and how much we've wanted to see them as viewers get their endings. Not necessarily specifically happy endings, but satisfying endings. Endings that fit them perfectly. And we did, for every single one. And that makes this finale something special. Because not every show does that. Not every show gives us a truly satisfying conclusion. But this one did. And so I want to thank all of you who have followed with my Castlevania reactions since I started them. And when the sequel series comes out, I'll definitely react to it. I definitely want to see the future of this franchise in a way. But like I said, this was a satisfying conclusion. And although it did leave a couple questions at the end, especially with Vlad and Lisa, it still ended in a way where, honestly, even if there was no sequel series coming, I would be happy with this. I would be satisfied with this. So, yeah, thank you all so much for tuning into these videos. But now we talk about what is going to replace Castlevania in this slot going forward. So I have chosen to put in this slot something I did a first impressions reaction to. Not a first impressions review, a first impressions reaction. I talked about how I was going to get to it, that I was going to react to it further, and I just had to find a slot to fit it into, and it was the perfect slot to fit it into, and I think it's about time we get to it. And that is Revolutionary Girl Utena. So I already reacted to the first episode through the first impressions reaction, so next week we will start with episode 2 and go onward. And episode 1 definitely impressed me, so I'm definitely excited to see what more this series has in store. But yeah, this is very often touted as one of the best classic anime, and many praise it for its revolutionary, pun intended, queer representation for its time period. And even if it's not like as blatant and in your face as some queer representation is nowadays in television, whether live action, cartoons, or anime, something like the Owl House, which is super blatant with it. Even if it's not like that, it's still praised nonetheless for the time. Because at that time, stuff like that, any kind of queer representation was just kind of unheard of. So the fact that they had something, and that the fact that people knew it was that, it says something. So yeah, I am definitely excited for more of that. But that being said, that will begin next week, next Saturday, so we'll get to that then. But in the meantime, tell me in the comments below what you thought of this finale of Castlevania Season 4 and of the series as a whole. What did you think of just how the series closed out? What do you think about the endings? Did you find them as satisfying as I did for each of these characters? And again, let me know in the comments if I was right or wrong about what the sequel series is supposedly going to be about. You can correct me on that, but I believe I heard it was about Trevor and Sypha's son and that it is Richter. But again, I might be wrong, so if I am wrong, please correct me. But either way, thank you so much for tuning in. And for now, I'm Connie and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.